Hey guys, Rich from Rich Gaming. Hope everyone is doing fantastically well, and in this video we're continuing our learning series, this time learning all about special conditions, what they are, how you get them, how you get rid of them, and some of the little nuances around the wordings of them. Before we get into the main part of the video, however, a big request to everybody out there. There are still over 60% of you that are not yet subscribed to the channel, and that means that you are missing out on the opportunity to win a brand new character pack for the month of July, which we'll be drawing in a few days. So make sure you take a second now, pop down, hit that subscribe button. It really does help me out on the channel. So first of all then, what are special conditions? Well, these are conditions that, for the moment at least, impede a character that they are placed on. There are currently 10 special conditions in the game, and they are bleed, hex, incinerate, judgment, poison, root, shock, slur, stagger, and stun. Now, before we jump into each special condition and some interesting mechanics around them, let's look at some general rules around special conditions, how they can be applied to your opponent, and more importantly, how you can get rid of them. To start with then, how can special conditions be applied? Well, the most common way is through character attacks or superpowers. Many characters can dish out various special conditions. Sometimes it requires a certain trigger, such as a wild or dealing damage, but then there are some times where it just happens. Mostly once an attack is resolved, but there are some abilities and superpowers that apply before damage is dealt. Mystique's espionage is one example, so make sure you read the wording correctly on them. Some characters can also apply multiple special conditions within a single attack. Star-Lord's full auto, for example, can apply bleed, shock, slur or stun for each wild he rolls, whereas Hawkeye's arrow shot allows the player to choose from multiple special conditions. But no matter how many wilds he rolls, you can only ever choose one condition to apply. Once again, make sure you read the ability correctly. We've mentioned it in our 11 rules video that you can find here, but it's worth mentioning again that you don't spend dice to trigger effects. So if a character has multiple things that can trigger on a single wild, Kingpin's headbutt for example, he only needs one wild to trigger both the stun and the push. Superpowers speak for themselves. Characters will usually spend power, but sometimes other tokens that they have, and apply whatever special conditions they can. Certain tactic cards, such as All Webbed Up and There Will Be Carnage, also allow you to apply special conditions to your enemy. Lastly then is crisis cards that can apply special conditions at certain times. Demon Downtowns, for example, causes all characters who are within range 1 during the power phase to gain the Incinerate special condition. And once again, we have covered this in previous videos, but it's worth pointing out here again, a character cannot be affected by the same ability or effect more than once at the same time. So yes, you can apply a slur, a stun and a bleed to a single character, but you cannot apply 2 bleeds, for example, to double the effect of that special condition. So that's how characters gain special conditions, but how do you remove these from your characters? Well, every character in the game can make what is called a shake action, allowing them to remove one special condition token. Be aware, however, that this will use one of your 2 actions for this activation. Some characters have superpowers that allow them to remove certain conditions. Mr. Sinister, for example, can use his genetic samples and his engineered perfection superpower to remove one special condition for each genetic sample token he spends. As well as dishing out special conditions, certain tactics cards such as the Carbonadium Synthesizer and Crew of the Milano can remove special conditions, plus anyone holding Deadpool's Chimichanga can remove one condition at the end of their activation. Lastly then, we have Thor's Prince of Asgard affiliation ability that allows a character to spend 1 power and remove 1 special condition. I think now is a good time to talk about certain characters who can stop other characters from shaking certain special conditions. The one that springs to the top of my mind right now is Scarlet Witch, but I'm sure there are, or there at least will be in the future, more characters. Now, once again, we need to ensure that we read every part of the superpower to fully understand what it does. If we take, for example, Scarlet Witch's Hex Field that stops an enemy character from removing the Hex, Judgment and Poison conditions, but only when a character performs a shake action. This means that when an enemy character is within range, they cannot shake these 3 special conditions. They can, however, use any tactics cards, superpowers, or special tokens that do not have the shake keyword to still remove these special conditions. The last way a character then can remove special conditions is when the character flips its card from its healthy to its unhealthy side. Note that condition tokens are only removed from a character when it is actually flipped and not when the character is dazed. This means that if Luke Cage has the Incinerate special condition and is then dazed, but Lockjaw then spends 4 power needed for field dressing, Luke would remove his daze token, but the Incinerate token would stay as his card hasn't been flipped. Now, with all of those general rules out of the way, let's look at each special condition in turn. Now, Bleed is a fairly straightforward special condition. The character suffers 1 damage at the end of each of its activation, but there are a few nuances to point out here. Firstly, Bleed, as all special conditions are considered, is a neutral effect. So the character does not gain power when it takes a damage, but it also means that characters like Thanos cannot reduce the damage of Bleed by 1 as his ability specifies enemy effects. Crossbones, however, can use his Immune to Pain and mitigate its effect by spending 1 power, and any character that's going to use All You've Got or any other ability allowing them a second activation will take 1 damage at the end of its first activation and then 1 damage again at the end of its second activation. Bleed can also not be countered by healing factor, as player effects are always, unless specified, resolved before neutral effects. This means that Bleed will be the last thing that happens to a character during its activation. However, it also means that a 1 health Corvus or Proxima can still trigger their husband and wife before being dazed KO'd by the Bleed. This is one of my personal favourites. The character doesn't roll additional dice for its critical results during attack, defence or dodge rolls. This is another one that is fairly straightforward with no real unexpected mechanics. One thing to point out is that it will work on anything that is also acting as a crit, such as the failure when you are holding the reality gem or Domino's probability manipulation. Another very effective superpower. Characters with Incinerate remove 1 die from their defense rolls. Couple of things to note here. Firstly is that a character can only ever have their defense pool reduced to a minimum of 1, again unless specified. So throwing an Incinerate on Mysterio and performing a physical attack against him is still going to allow him to roll 1 die. It's also worth noting that this is for defense rolls only and does not apply to dodge rolls. One of the newer conditions that was introduced with Run and the Accuser, with characters not gaining power when suffering damage from enemy attacks. Again, a couple of things to note here in that it is only enemy attacks that are counted, so damage from throws or superpowers such as tricks and traps would still generate power as they're classed as superpowers and not attacks. Poison is one that on the surface seems quite simple, but the timings can cause some confusion. The key wording here is that the character loses 1 power during the power phase. This does not mean that a normal character would gain no power, so let's have a quick look at the timing of the power phase. We know that the first thing that we do in a power phase is assign every character with their allotted power. We then perform any player effects. We then perform any neutral effects, and this is where poison would kick in. So what does that mean? Well, it means there is a window of opportunity between when a character gains power and right before poison kicks in to be able to perform any superpowers, special abilities or tactics cards that you've got. Right now, the best example I can think of is the Criminal Syndicate tactics cards, all according to plan. So let's have a quick look at an example of how that would work. So in this scenario, we can see that all of our Criminal Syndicate members are suffering from poison, but we're at the beginning of the power phase, so every single character gains 1 power. These characters can now spend their 10 power collectively to play the tactics card, all according to plan, all before poison kicks in. Now a character cannot go less than 0 power, so in this case the poison would have no effect. So another very effective superpower, and one that we've seen on more characters of late, characters must spend 1 power before using an active or reactive superpower. This is particularly effective against affiliations who rely a lot on using superpowers, and whilst we already discussed this, you can't apply more than 1 route to a single character. It does stack with things like Loki's God of Mischief, causing your opponent some real problems and having to spend 2 power before they actually use a superpower. Characters with shock remove 1 die from their attack pool, another straightforward one, but once again we need to remember that a character's dice pool can never be reduced to less than 1. One of the most dished out special conditions, slur restricts the character to only being able to use the short movement tool when advancing. Whilst on the surface it again seems pretty straightforward, it is worth pointing out a couple of gotchas. Firstly, we have to know it is advances only, not all movements, so this means that a character can be placed using whatever range tool or superpower says, but it also means that a character can still be thrown, long or medium. It does however affect any movement action a character wants to take, but it also affects superpowers such as Quicksilver's Speedster or Toad's Slippery, as this clearly states advance. Now time for, in my opinion at least, the most impactful special condition in the game, stagger. When a character activates its first action, must be a shake action. This shake action must remove the stagger condition. So why is this so good? Well, by forcing the enemy character to perform a shake as their first action, you're essentially reducing their actions next turn by 1. Really nice against a big hitter or a character that needs to move first before they can attack. As all things in MCP, however, there are a couple of things in the game that can overcome this, namely the arch nemesis abilities we see on Green Goblin and Carnage. Targeted towards Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, this superpower clearly states that its first action, if it is in range and able, must be an attack action against either of these characters. As this overrides the stagger condition, it also means that the player can choose to make any other action for their second action and does not have to remove the stagger condition. If they can't make an attack action as their first action, however, they still have to remove the stagger. And lastly then is stun. If an effect would cause a character to gain more than 1 power, it only gains 1 instead. So what does and doesn't this cover? Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Firstly, let's take Ronan with the power gem, who is contesting the serum canister on the Infinity Formula Crisis. During the power phase, under normal circumstances, Ronan would gain 1 power from it being the power phase, 2 power from the power gem, and 1 power from the serum canister, giving him 4 power in total. If, however, Ronan has stun, this changes things slightly. So what we need to ascertain is what is additional power to the innate you get each turn, and what is a separate source. Powers from gems is classed as an addition to the innate power. So we take the 3 power for these and reduce it down to 1. The serum canister, however, is a separate source, meaning that Ronan gains this power, giving him a total of 2 this turn. Now let's look at Magneto, who currently has 2 metal constructs on the map, and it's now the power phase. Again, under normal circumstances, Magneto would gain 3 power, 1 innate, and 2 from the 2 metal constructs he has on the map. If Magneto now has the stun in the same scenario, he still gains 1 innate power, but as the Master of Magnetism does not state he gains additional power, this is a separate source, so would still gain 1 power from his 2 metal constructs, giving him 2 power in total. So the key thing here with power generation is the keyword additional. We can see this on characters such as She-Hulk, Hulk, Ebony Maw, Cable and Jean Grey, plus on the superpower Asgardian, where the extra power from each of these is additional to, so is the same source as the innate power and would be affected by stun. Now let's take a look at the effects of stun when gaining power outside of the power phase, firstly when attacking. Crossbones performs a strike and does 3 damage to Captain America. This would normally generate 3 power for Crossbones, plus if he was in the Cabal affiliation under Red Skull's leadership, would also gain an additional power from this, giving him 4 in total. Now in the same scenario, but with Crossbones being stunned, he would only gain 1 power from the attack, but would still gain 1 power from Red Skull's leadership, as this is a separate source. Lastly then, let's look at taking damage and gaining power. Thanos, attacking Lockjaw with a strike, makes 3 successes, but rolls the wiles needed for a throw. Now, irrespective of whether the throw is before or after damage is dealt, it is a separate source, so is not affected by stun in the same way, and Lockjaw would still gain the power from the 1 damage taken from the throw. He will then gain 1 power from the 3 damage taken from the strike due to the effects from stun, giving him 2 power in total. And there we go, guys. That is a rundown of the current 10 special conditions in the game, some generic rules across the board, and then some nuances that you may or indeed may not have known about on each of those special conditions. Let me know down in the comment section below if there's anything there that you think I've missed. As always, pick me up on anything that you think I've got wrong. Remember, we have our giveaway running for the month of July, where 1 lucky subscriber who's commented on this or any other video for the month of July is in with a chance of winning a brand new character pack. And as always, it leaves me with just enough time to say stay well, keep safe, and until next time, bye for now.